Blood doesn't make a family honorable. Character does. The crystal chandeliers shimmered above the grand ballroom as laughter drifted through the air and champagne glasses caught the warm glow of golden lights. Every detail of the reception at the Grand Crescent Hotel reflected elegance, from the towering white roses to the string quartet performing beside the marble staircase. Guests in tailored tuxedos and designer gowns filled the room with polished smiles, congratulating the newly married couple, while photographers moved carefully between tables, capturing what everyone expected would become the perfect ending to a perfect day. At the center of it all stood Emily Carter, radiant in her custom ivory gown, accepting compliments with effortless confidence. Beside her, Marcus Brooks smiled politely, though something behind his eyes suggested he was still adjusting to the overwhelming spectacle that surrounded him. Across the ballroom, seated quietly at a modest table near the back, Marcus's mother, Gloria Brooks, gently folded her hands in her lap. Her navy blue dress was simple, elegant without extravagance, and the silver brooch pinned near her shoulder had once belonged to her late husband. She watched her son with the same proud expression she had worn the day he graduated college, the day he accepted his first job, the day he bought his first home. She never cared about expensive venues or luxurious decorations. Seeing Marcus happy had always been enough. A server quietly placed a fresh glass of iced tea beside her. Gloria smiled warmly and thanked him by name after reading the small tag on his jacket. The young man blinked with surprise before returning her smile, clearly unaccustomed to guests noticing people who worked behind the scenes. Nearby, several members of the Carter family exchanged subtle glances in Gloria's direction. Their whispers blended beneath the music, almost impossible to hear, yet impossible to miss. Emily's mother leaned toward her daughter with a composed smile that barely concealed her discomfort. Emily nodded almost imperceptibly before taking a slow breath and stepping toward the stage where the master of ceremonies was, preparing the next part of the evening. The quartet faded into silence as the microphone came alive with a soft hum. Every conversation gradually stopped. Hundreds of eyes shifted toward the newlyweds, expecting a heartfelt toast. Emily accepted the microphone with graceful confidence, smiling as flashes from photographers illuminated the ballroom. Before we invite our immediate families to the front table for the official portraits, she began, her voice calm and perfectly measured. I'd like to ask that only relatives representing the Carter and Brooks families in a manner appropriate for this celebration join us. A few guests exchanged puzzled looks. Emily slowly turned her gaze across the ballroom until it settled directly on Gloria. Her smile never disappeared. Mrs. Brooks, she continued gently enough to sound polite. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable remaining with the other guests instead of joining the family portraits. The room became impossibly still. Even the musicians lowered their instruments. Marcus stared at his bride, unable to process what he had just heard. Gloria remained seated, her fingers resting quietly against the edge of her glass. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look angry. She simply lifted her eyes toward her son, offering him the same reassuring smile she had given him his entire life, as though she wanted him to know that no matter what happened next, her greatest concern was never herself. It was him. Marcus finally found his voice, but before he could speak, Gloria gave the smallest shake of her head. It was a gesture he had known since childhood, one that meant, do not make this harder than it has to be. Slowly, she rose from her chair, smoothing the fabric of her navy dress with calm hands. The room remained silent as every guest watched to see whether she would argue, defend herself, or leave in humiliation. Instead, she offered Emily a gentle smile that carried neither bitterness nor resentment. If stepping aside helps everyone enjoy this beautiful evening, Gloria said softly, then I will gladly do that. Today is about celebrating your future together. Her voice was warm, steady, almost comforting, and somehow that made the silence even heavier. Marcus felt a knot tighten in his chest. He remembered another evening more than 25 years earlier, when his mother had walked 3 miles home after finishing a double nursing shift because the old family car had broken down and there had not been enough money to repair it. She had arrived exhausted, changed into an old sweatshirt, and still stayed awake helping him build a cardboard model for his elementary school science project. She had never complained. Not once. There had been countless moments like that. Christmas mornings when the gifts were small but wrapped with care. Long nights when she quietly skipped dinner, insisting she had already eaten at work even though Marcus later discovered there had simply not been enough food for both of them. Every sacrifice had been hidden behind the same reassuring smile she wore now. Emily knew almost none of those stories. She had never asked. Her world had always been measured by appearances, private schools, exclusive neighborhoods, and invitations that carried family names people recognized. Richard Carter had spent years teaching his daughter that reputation opened doors before talent ever had the chance to knock. Standing near the front of the ballroom, he folded his arms with quiet approval, believing the uncomfortable moment would quickly pass and the celebration would return to normal. Several guests nodded politely, pretending nothing unusual had happened. Others lowered their eyes, uncomfortable but unwilling to challenge the wealthy family hosting the reception. Gloria reached for her small handbag resting beside her chair. Before leaving, she paused beside an elderly dishwasher who had quietly stepped into the ballroom, carrying a tray of clean plates. "Congratulations on becoming a grandfather last month," Gloria said with genuine warmth after noticing the tiny photograph tucked inside his name badge. The man's face brightened with surprise. "Thank you, ma'am," he replied. "She is 6 weeks old today." Gloria smiled as though his joy mattered every bit as much as the lavish celebration surrounding them. Then she thanked the nearby servers for their kindness throughout the evening and quietly walked toward the ballroom entrance without asking anyone to notice her. Marcus instinctively took one step forward, but dozens of cameras remained pointed toward the newlyweds. Torn between the expectations of the ceremony and the woman who had devoted her entire life to his happiness, he stood frozen. Gloria glanced back only once. Her eyes met his for a brief moment, filled not with disappointment, but with encouragement. She wanted him to breathe. She wanted him to remain calm. Most of all, she wanted him to remember the lesson she had repeated since he was a little boy. People could take away comfort, opportunity, even dignity for a moment, but they could never take away the choice to respond with grace. The ballroom doors closed softly behind Gloria, muffling the applause, the music, and the conversations that slowly returned inside. Outside, the evening air felt cooler, carrying the faint scent of fresh rain from somewhere beyond the city skyline. She stood beneath the covered entrance of the hotel for a moment, taking a slow breath before adjusting the strap of her handbag. Through the towering glass windows, she could still see the celebration continuing without her. Waiters crossed polished marble floors carrying silver trays. Photographers repositioned families beneath sparkling chandeliers, and the Carter family resumed greeting guests as though the uncomfortable moment had already become yesterday's news. Inside, Richard Carter accepted congratulations with the confidence of a man who had spent decades believing reputation could solve every problem. More than once he had reminded Marcus that marriage united families, not merely two people, and that public image mattered almost as much as personal character. Emily had grown up hearing the same lessons. She learned which neighborhoods reflected success, which universities impressed investors, and which last names opened doors before introductions were ever necessary. Although she had fallen in love with Marcus because of his intelligence and kindness, she quietly convinced herself that his modest upbringing was a chapter best left behind. In her mind, appearances protected the future they planned to build together. She never considered how deeply appearances could wound someone whose entire life had been built on quiet sacrifice instead of public recognition. Marcus remained standing near the front of the ballroom, barely hearing the conversations around him. Friends offered congratulations that sounded distant, almost hollow. His attention stayed fixed on the entrance where his mother had disappeared only moments earlier. Every instinct urged him to follow her, yet each passing second seemed to tighten the invisible expectations surrounding him. The wedding planner whispered that the photographers were waiting. A cousin reminded him that the family portraits had been carefully scheduled. Emily reached gently for his hand, but he could not ignore the heaviness settling inside his chest. Across the room, an elderly pianist continued playing soft jazz melodies, though even the music seemed hesitant now. Several guests quietly exchanged uneasy glances. A young waitress carrying coffee cups paused briefly before continuing her route, her expression reflecting the same silent discomfort many others felt but never voiced. Meanwhile, Gloria slowly descended the broad stone steps leading toward the circular driveway. She neither hurried nor looked back again. A hotel valet smiled politely and offered to call a taxi. Gloria thanked him with genuine warmth and said she preferred to wait outside for a little while because the evening breeze reminded her of summers when Marcus was still a little boy chasing fireflies in neighborhood parks. The valet smiled, touched by the unexpected memory. As Gloria settled onto a nearby stone bench surrounded by neatly trimmed white hydrangeas, she reached into her handbag and carefully unfolded an old photograph. It showed a much younger Marcus standing beside his parents on his first day of kindergarten, wearing sneakers that had been polished so carefully they almost looked brand new. She traced the edge of the faded picture with one finger and smiled softly. Not because the evening had gone as she hoped, but because no embarrassing moment could erase decades of love, perseverance, and faith. Unknown to everyone inside the ballroom, the quiet stillness outside was only moments away from being interrupted by something no guest, no photographer, and certainly no member of the Carter family could have possibly anticipated. The first sound was so distant that almost no one noticed it. A low, refined engine echoed beyond the front gates before fading beneath the music still drifting from the ballroom. Gloria remained seated on the stone bench, unaware that several hotel valets had suddenly straightened their posture. One young attendant quietly adjusted his jacket, glancing toward the long entrance drive with growing curiosity. Moments later, another identical sound joined the first, followed by a third. 3 sets of headlights slowly appeared beyond the wrought iron gates, their beams reflecting across the polished pavement like ribbons of liquid gold. The security staff instinctively stepped aside as 3 immaculate black Rolls-Royce Phantoms entered the property one behind another with perfect spacing. Their glossy finishes reflected the evening lights, while the famous silver hood ornaments shimmered beneath the hotel entrance canopy. Guests standing near the lobby windows stopped talking mid-sentence. Several photographers instinctively lifted their cameras, assuming an unexpected celebrity or prominent public figure had arrived. Inside the ballroom, the sudden movement near the entrance began drawing attention away from the reception. Conversations softened. Heads turned. Even the musicians gradually lowered the volume of their performance as whispers spread from one table to another. Richard Carter frowned slightly, clearly annoyed that something outside was distracting everyone during what he believed should remain the highlight of his daughter's reception. Emily glanced toward the windows with polite curiosity, expecting another wealthy family to be arriving fashionably late. Marcus noticed the growing commotion almost immediately. Without waiting for anyone's permission, he quietly stepped away from the photographers and walked toward the lobby, his heart telling him something important was unfolding beyond the glass doors. Outside, the 3 luxury automobiles rolled to a gentle stop directly in front of the entrance. None of the passengers hurried. Everything about their arrival reflected quiet confidence rather than display. Uniformed chauffeurs stepped out almost simultaneously and respectfully opened each rear passenger door. Hotel employees exchanged bewildered glances because the reservations list had not mentioned any distinguished delegation arriving that evening. Gloria slowly looked up from the old photograph resting in her hands. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face, followed almost instantly by gentle recognition. Her expression did not change into excitement. Instead, she smiled with the quiet affection usually reserved for old friends unexpectedly appearing after many years apart. The first person to step from the lead vehicle was an elegant woman in her early 60s wearing a tailored navy suit with a small gold lapel pin. Behind her emerged a respected heart surgeon known throughout the state for leading one of the nation's most successful pediatric hospitals. From the second automobile came the founder of a technology company whose scholarship foundation had helped thousands of first-generation college students. The third vehicle carried a federal judge, a retired military officer, and the president of a nationally recognized charitable organization. None of them looked toward the ballroom. None of them admired the decorations or acknowledged the crowd gathering nearby. Every one of them looked only toward the woman sitting quietly on the stone bench. Marcus had just reached the front entrance when he heard the first greeting carried gently through the cool evening air. The elegantly dressed woman smiled with unmistakable warmth and opened her arms. "Mom Gloria," she said softly, her voice filled with genuine affection. "We came as soon as we heard." The others echoed similar greetings one after another, each speaking with the familiarity of family rather than formality. Behind the glass doors, dozens of wedding guests stood completely speechless, struggling to understand why some of the most respected people in the country were walking past everyone else simply to stand beside the quiet woman they had overlooked only minutes before. Marcus stepped outside without noticing that Emily had called his name twice behind him. The warm light from the ballroom spilled across the marble entrance, stopping just short of where Gloria now stood, surrounded by the unexpected visitors. None of them behaved like wealthy people trying to impress a crowd. Instead, they greeted her with the quiet respect usually reserved for someone whose influence had been earned over decades rather than purchased overnight. The woman in the navy suit embraced Gloria gently. "You still disappear whenever attention finds you," she said with a smile. Gloria laughed softly. "Old habits are difficult to break." The renowned heart surgeon stepped forward next. "I would never have graduated medical school without you," he said sincerely. "You worked extra hospital shifts so the scholarship fund could cover students like me when no one else believed we belonged there." Before Gloria could answer, the technology founder shook his head with a grateful smile. "She did the same for me. I was 17, sleeping in my car, convinced my future was over. She found me at a community center, handed me a hot meal, and introduced me to a mentor who changed my life." The retired military officer added quietly, "After my deployment, I had nowhere to go. Everyone thanked me for my service, but she was the one who actually helped me rebuild my life." The federal judge smiled warmly. "People see the robe now. They never saw the frightened college freshman who almost dropped out because tuition was impossible. Mrs. Brooks did." Each sentence landed like another wave across the growing crowd. Hotel employees slowly gathered near the entrance. Wedding guests drifted outside in small groups, unable to resist the unfolding scene. Richard Carter finally walked through the revolving doors with Emily beside him, both wearing expressions that shifted from annoyance to visible confusion. None of the distinguished visitors acknowledged Richard's reputation or his business success. Their attention never left Gloria. Emily looked from one accomplished face to another, struggling to understand why leaders she recognized from national magazines and television interviews all seemed connected to the quiet woman she had dismissed only minutes earlier. Marcus reached his mother and gently took her hand. Gloria squeezed it with the same reassuring calm she had always carried. "Mom," he whispered, emotion catching in his voice. "Why did you never tell me?" Gloria smiled tenderly. "Because kindness is not an investment you keep records of. If you help someone expecting recognition later, then you were never really helping them." The words settled over the gathering like a gentle breeze. Even the photographers who had rushed outside lowered their cameras for a moment, sensing that no photograph could fully capture what was unfolding. The elegant woman then turned toward Marcus. "Your mother refused every award our foundation ever offered her," she explained. "She always said the success belonged to the students, not to the person who believed in them first." Another guest nodded. "She quietly funded mentorship programs in 12 cities." The surgeon added, "She visited children's hospitals every Thanksgiving after finishing her nursing shifts." The technology founder smiled. "She insisted every scholarship remain anonymous because she never wanted gratitude to become a burden." Richard Carter's confident posture slowly disappeared as realization settled across his face. The woman he had silently judged by her simple dress and quiet manners had spent decades shaping lives far beyond anything wealth alone could accomplish. Around him, the whispers changed completely. No one was asking who had arrived anymore. They were asking the same question instead. Who was Gloria Brooks? And how had they all failed to see her worth until now? The excitement that had rippled through the crowd only moments earlier slowly gave way to something quieter. The conversations faded until the only sounds were the distant fountain near the hotel entrance and the gentle rustling of leaves stirred by the evening breeze. Golden light from the ballroom spilled across the marble steps, meeting the cool blue tones of twilight, where Gloria stood surrounded by people whose lives she had quietly transformed. She looked almost uncomfortable with the attention, as though every compliment being offered belonged to someone else. "Please," she said with a humble smile, "you have all accomplished wonderful things because you chose perseverance. I only happened to cross your paths. The federal judge shook her head. No, Mom Gloria. You crossed our paths when everyone else walked past us. The heart surgeon nodded. You taught us that dignity is never something another person gives you. It is something you carry even when no one notices. Those words lingered in the cool evening air. Marcus lowered his eyes, overwhelmed by memories he had never fully understood until now. As a child, he often wondered why strangers smiled at his mother in grocery stores, why former patients hugged her years after leaving the hospital, why handwritten holiday cards arrived from families whose names he did not recognize. She had never explained. She simply placed every card into an old cedar box in the hallway closet and returned to living the same quiet life she always had. Emily stood only a few feet away, unable to speak. For the first time since the wedding ceremony began, she truly looked at Gloria rather than merely seeing her. She noticed the careful stitching along the cuff of her navy dress where a loose thread had been repaired by hand. She noticed the worn edges of the old photograph still resting inside Gloria's handbag. She noticed the warmth in Gloria's eyes each time another person thanked her, not with pride, but with genuine happiness that they had built meaningful lives. The realization settled heavily inside her. She had mistaken simplicity for insignificance. Richard Carter remained motionless near the entrance. His business career had taught him how to recognize influence through balance sheets, investments, and prestigious titles. Yet standing before him was a woman whose greatest achievements could not be measured by financial reports. They lived instead in grateful voices, successful families, healed hearts, and opportunities that had quietly multiplied over decades. Even the hotel staff seemed changed by the moment. The young valet who had first offered Gloria a taxi wiped moisture from the corner of one eye before quickly looking away. A waitress who had served the reception folded her hands together with quiet admiration. No one appeared interested in the luxury automobiles anymore. They had become little more than silent witnesses. What mattered was the woman every passenger had come to honor. Gloria glanced toward the ballroom, where music had resumed softly in the distance. She took a slow breath and smiled at Marcus. Your father always told me that kindness grows best when nobody is watching, she said gently. Tonight people happened to see a few branches, but the roots were planted a very long time ago. Marcus felt tears gather in his eyes, but he smiled through them. Around them, the evening seemed to pause, wrapped in a peaceful silence that no applause could have improved, as though everyone present had been given an unexpected chance to remember that the greatest lives are often the quietest ones. Emily slowly stepped forward, her wedding gown whispering across the polished stone beneath her feet. The confidence that had carried her through the entire day had quietly disappeared, replaced by something she had rarely experienced in public life, the unmistakable weight of self-reflection. She looked at Gloria, then at the distinguished men and women standing around her, each one carrying a story that traced back to the same humble nurse who had never once mentioned her own sacrifices. Emily realized that every standard she had used to judge significance had suddenly become meaningless. Expensive invitations, exclusive neighborhoods, influential business connections, and carefully protected family reputations all seemed strangely small compared to a lifetime of anonymous compassion. Richard Carter cleared his throat as though searching for words that refused to come. Throughout his career, he had negotiated multi-million-dollar agreements without hesitation, yet speaking now felt unexpectedly difficult. The technology founder quietly approached him with a respectful smile. Mr. Carter, he said, you probably recognize me from business conferences. Richard nodded immediately. Of course. The man smiled warmly before glancing toward Gloria. 20 years ago, I was sleeping in my car after losing my parents. Mrs. Brooks found me before anyone knew my name. Without her, there would never have been a company for you to recognize. The statement landed with quiet force. Before Richard could respond, the federal judge added, the scholarship she secretly funded paid my first year of law school. She attended my graduation but stood in the last row because she wanted my family to receive the credit. The heart surgeon smiled gently. When I opened the Children's Cardiac Center, I asked her to stand beside me during the ribbon cutting. She politely declined because she said the children deserved everyone's attention more than she did. Emily covered her mouth as tears slowly gathered in her eyes. The pieces finally connected. Gloria had never been overlooked because she lacked value. She had chosen a life where recognition was never the reward. Marcus watched his mother's peaceful expression and suddenly understood why she had always encouraged him to treat every person with equal respect, whether they cleaned hospital floors or led board meetings. She had been living that lesson every single day. Emily slowly approached Gloria until only a few feet separated them. Her voice trembled, no longer polished by rehearsed confidence. "Mrs. Brooks," she whispered, "I spent months planning every perfect detail of this wedding, but somehow I failed to honor the person who gave me the greatest gift I could ever receive." Gloria tilted her head gently. "And what gift was that?" Emily looked toward Marcus before meeting Gloria's eyes again. "The man you raised." The evening breeze carried the words into the quiet gathering. Several guests lowered their heads, visibly moved. Gloria smiled with quiet affection, but before she could answer, Marcus reached for Emily's hand. His expression held disappointment, but also hope. He knew this moment would define not only their marriage, but the kind of family they would become from that day forward. Around them, the evening sky deepened into shades of indigo while the lights from the ballroom reflected softly against the three waiting automobiles. The luxury cars that had first captured everyone's attention no longer represented wealth. Instead, they stood as silent reminders that the richest legacy any person could leave behind was measured not by what they owned, but by how many lives quietly carried their kindness forward long after the moment had passed. For a long moment, no one moved. The evening seemed to hold its breath as every eye remained fixed on Gloria. She looked at Emily with the same calm kindness that had carried her through every difficult season of her life. There was no satisfaction in her expression, no trace of victory, only quiet understanding. Emily slowly removed the microphone that was still clipped to the bodice of her gown and handed it to the master of ceremonies. Then, without worrying about the expensive fabric of her dress or the hundreds of guests watching, she walked directly to Gloria. Tears shimmered in her eyes as she spoke softly enough that only those closest could hear it first. "Mrs. Brooks, I judged you by things that never should have mattered. I saw your clothes before I saw your heart. I saw your simplicity before I saw your strength. I forgot that the greatest families are not built by wealth. They are built by people like you." The silence deepened. Richard Carter stepped forward beside his daughter, his shoulders no longer carrying the confidence of a powerful businessman, but the humility of a father who had recognized his own mistake. He looked directly at Gloria. "I have spent my entire career believing success could be measured by influence, titles, and accomplishments. Tonight, I learned that character is the only legacy that truly lasts. Mrs. Brooks, I owe you an apology." Gloria listened quietly before offering a gentle smile. "Mr. Carter, all of us make mistakes. The important question is whether we allow them to make us better people tomorrow than we were yesterday." Richard lowered his head with genuine respect. Around them, several guests quietly wiped away tears. The hotel staff stood together near the entrance, smiling as though they had witnessed something far more meaningful than a wedding reception. Marcus looked at his mother with overwhelming gratitude. "Mom," he said softly, "I should have walked out with you the moment you stood up." Gloria reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. "No, Marcus. Tonight you learned something far more valuable than defending me. You learned to recognize dignity wherever you find it, and to never let another person define someone's worth." Emily looked at Marcus, then back to Gloria. "If you are willing," she asked through trembling emotion, "would you come back inside with us? Not because everyone now knows who you are, but because I finally understand who you have always been." Gloria looked at the faces surrounding her. She saw regret, gratitude, hope, and sincerity. Then she nodded. "I would be honored." As the group began walking back toward the ballroom together, no one rushed ahead. The distinguished guests who had arrived in the three elegant automobiles quietly followed several respectful steps behind Gloria, allowing her to enter first. When the ballroom doors opened once again, every guest inside rose to their feet without being asked. The applause that followed was not loud or theatrical. It was warm, genuine, and filled with respect. Gloria paused for only a second before smiling with quiet humility. "Please," she said softly, "save your applause for the bride and groom. Tonight is still about the beginning of their journey. I only hope that wherever life leads them, they always remember that kindness will open more doors than pride ever can." Her words settled gently across the room. And in that moment, everyone understood that the most remarkable person at the celebration was also the one who had never asked to be noticed. The celebration resumed, but nothing about it felt the same. The crystal chandeliers still sparkled above the ballroom. The musicians continued their gentle melodies, and the floral arrangements remained as breathtaking as they had been at the beginning of the evening. Yet the atmosphere had changed in a way no decorator could have planned. It was quieter, warmer, more sincere. Guests who had spent the reception discussing business, vacations, and investment portfolios now found themselves sharing stories about teachers who had changed their lives, neighbors who had quietly helped their families, and ordinary people whose kindness had shaped extraordinary futures. Gloria sat at the family table only after Emily personally invited her to take the seat of honor. This time there was no hesitation from anyone in the room. Richard Carter himself pulled out the chair for her before taking his own place beside his daughter. Marcus looked across the table at the two people he loved most and felt something inside him finally settle. The tension that had followed him throughout the evening disappeared, replaced by gratitude deeper than words could express. During the final family photographs, the photographer instinctively asked everyone to gather closer together. Without discussing it, Emily gently wrapped one arm around Gloria while Marcus held his mother's hand. The camera captured smiles, but it also captured something far more valuable. It captured forgiveness. Outside, the three elegant automobiles still waited beneath the soft glow of the entrance lights, although their passengers quietly prepared to leave without ceremony. Before departing, each of them embraced Gloria one last time, promising to visit soon instead of waiting for another special occasion. She reminded every one of them to keep serving others before thinking about themselves, just as she always had. One by one, the vehicles disappeared into the evening, leaving only the quiet reflection of their headlights across the rain-washed pavement. Inside the ballroom, the final dance began. Marcus invited both Emily and Gloria onto the floor for a brief moment before the newlyweds shared the rest of the dance together. Laughter returned, but it sounded different now. It carried humility instead of pride. As the evening came to an end, hotel employees lined the hallway to thank the guests for attending. Gloria stopped to shake every hand she could, remembering names, offering encouragement, and thanking people whose work often went unnoticed. The young valet smiled as she wished him success in the engineering classes he planned to begin that fall. The waitress who had quietly admired her earlier received a warm promise that Gloria would attend her nursing school graduation if she was invited. Even after everything that had happened, Gloria continued noticing the people others often overlooked. Long after the last guest had gone home and the ballroom lights had begun to dim, one photograph remained on the reception table waiting to be collected. It showed 3 generations standing together beneath warm golden light. There were no luxury automobiles in the frame, no expensive decorations drawing attention, and no symbols of status demanding admiration. At the center stood a quiet black mother whose greatest accomplishment had never been her reputation, her influence, or the remarkable people who came to honor her. It had always been the countless lives she had lifted without expecting anything in return. As the final lights faded across the empty ballroom, the silence no longer felt lonely. It felt peaceful, carrying a simple truth that would remain long after the wedding day had become a memory. Respect can be demanded by power for a moment, but only kindness earns a place in people's hearts for a lifetime.